Welcome to this journey through one of the most haunting mysteries in Appalachian history. A story so disturbing that entire communities chose silence over remembrance. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will move you in a way few other accounts can, challenging everything you believe about the darkness that can take root in isolated places, where modernity's light fails to penetrate. We're about to delve into a mystery that consumed 7 innocent lives across 3 generations, where a geographic anomaly became a hunting ground and left a legacy so terrifying that maps were redrawn to erase its very existence from public memory. It was the year 1937. Europe was marching toward war, the Great Depression still gripped America in its suffocating fist, and in the remote mountains of eastern Kentucky, poverty wasn't just an economic condition. It was a way of life that had persisted for generations. But in Harlan County, deep within the forested ridges where civilization seemed more suggestion than reality, the situation was something else entirely. Something darker. There existed a place the locals called Drowned Hollow. The name itself should have been warning enough. But names, like so many things in these mountains, carried meanings that outsiders could never fully comprehend. This wasn't merely a depression in the landscape where water collected. This was a geographical anomaly, a wound in the earth that seemed to defy natural explanation, a basin nearly 300 feet deep, carved between 2 ridges like a giant's thumbprint pressed into the mountainside. Ancient hemlocks grew at impossible angles along its slopes. Fog gathered there even on clear days, pooling in the bottom like something living, something waiting. The hollow ran approximately 2 miles in length, narrow at both ends, but widening in its center to perhaps half a mile across. A thin creek ran through its lowest point, black water that emerged from underground springs and disappeared again into a series of limestone caves that honeycombed the surrounding rock. The water never reflected the sky, witnesses said. Even at noon, when sunlight managed to penetrate the canopy, that creek remained dark as obsidian, as though it flowed from some deeper darkness than mere underground springs could explain. People avoided Drowned Hollow. They had avoided it for generations, actually. Cherokee stories, passed down through the few remaining families who remembered the old ways, spoke of it as a place where the spirit world pressed too close to the living world. A thin place, they called it. White settlers who arrived in the 1700s had their own stories. British surveyor Marcus Whitfield documented the hollow in 1789, noting in his journal that his compass behaved erratically in the area and that his horses refused to descend into the basin. He wrote, "There exists here a peculiar oppression of the spirit which I cannot adequately describe. My men report dreams of drowning, though we are far from any significant body of water." But this story doesn't truly begin with ancient warnings or surveyor's notes. It begins with a boy named Thomas Elkridge. Thomas was 7 years old in the autumn of 1937, a thin child with his father's dark eyes and his mother's quick smile, though by that year, the smile had become increasingly rare. The Depression had been particularly cruel to Harlan County. Coal mines that had once employed thousands now sat abandoned, their entrances collapsing into themselves like the county's hopes for prosperity. The Elkridge family, like most families in the area, survived on subsistence farming, occasional hunting, and the quiet desperation that comes from watching each day repeat the struggles of the one before. They lived in a cabin approximately 4 miles from Drowned Hollow, close enough that on still nights they could hear the strange sounds that emerged from that place. Wind through the hemlocks, people said, though it sounded more like voices, more like whispers in a language just beyond comprehension. Thomas's father, Jacob Elkridge, worked occasional logging jobs when he could find them. His mother, Sarah, took in washing from the few families that could afford such luxuries. They had 3 children: Thomas, his older sister Mary, age 11, and baby Ruth, barely 2 years old. They were poor, profoundly so, but poverty was universal in these mountains. What made them notable, what would etch their name into the dark history of Harlan County, was what happened on October 23, 1937. That morning began unremarkably. Sarah sent Thomas to check the rabbit traps Jacob had set along the creek that ran behind their property. This was routine. Thomas had been running these traps since he was 5, old enough to reset them if empty, old enough to carry back their small prizes when luck was with them. The creek itself ran for about 2 miles before joining the larger stream that fed into Drowned Hollow, though Thomas's traps were nowhere near that junction. Jacob had been explicit: never go past the old lightning, struck oak, never approach the hollow. Thomas left just after dawn, carrying a canvas sack for any catches. The October morning was crisp, the sky that particular shade of blue that only autumn can produce. Frost clung to the higher elevations, painting the world in silver edges. Sarah watched him go, as she always did, waiting until he disappeared into the tree line before returning to her washing. He never came back. By noon, Sarah's concern had transformed into fear. By mid-afternoon, that fear had become panic. Jacob, working a job 15 miles away, wouldn't return until nightfall. Sarah took Mary and went searching, carrying baby Ruth on her hip. They found the traps, all empty, all undisturbed. They followed Thomas's tracks in the soft earth beside the creek. The tracks were clear, purposeful, the impressions of a boy who knew where he was going. Then, at a point approximately half a mile beyond where he should have stopped, the tracks changed. They became erratic, random. The stride lengthened as though Thomas had begun running, but running toward what? Running from what? The tracks led directly toward the ridge that overlooked Drowned Hollow. Sarah, despite every instinct screaming at her to turn back, followed them to the ridge's edge. There the tracks stopped, not faded, not obscured, simply stopped, as though Thomas had stepped off the earth itself. Sarah stood at that precipice, staring down into the fog-choked hollow below, and screamed her son's name until her voice gave out. The hollow swallowed the sound without echo, without response. Only that perpetual fog moved below, shifting and coiling like something breathing. When Jacob returned that evening, he organized a search party. 3 men from neighboring farms and the nearby community of Cranshaw Fork gathered with lanterns, rope, and rifles. They searched through the night, descended into Drowned Hollow despite their fears, called Thomas's name until dawn painted the sky gray. They found nothing, no body, no torn clothing, no signs of struggle, no indication that a 7-year-old boy had ever existed. The hollow had simply taken him, or so it seemed. Sheriff Coleman Driscoll was 53 years old that autumn, a man weathered by 3 decades of maintaining order in a county that often resisted the very concept. He was tall, broad, shouldered despite the lean times, with iron, gray hair and eyes that missed very little. He had served in the Great War, seen horrors in the trenches of France that he rarely discussed, and believed himself inoculated against shock. Thomas Elkridge's disappearance troubled him in ways he couldn't articulate. There was something wrong about the scene at the ridge. The tracks, he examined them personally, brought a tracking dog named Brutus, who had helped solve 3 murder cases in the previous 5 years. The dog followed Thomas's trail easily until reaching that exact spot where the tracks ended. Then Brutus had done something if Driscoll had never witnessed before. The dog had whined, backed away from the edge, and refused to proceed. No amount of coaxing or commanding could make the animal approach the hollow. "Dogs know things," his deputy, Vernon Hackett, said quietly. Vernon was 31, a local boy who had never left Harlan County, who knew its stories and superstitions the way city people know street names. "Dogs spook," Driscoll replied, though without conviction. They organized a more thorough search. 15 men descended into Drowned Hollow on October 25th, 2 days after Thomas vanished. They searched the creek banks, examined the cave entrances, looked for any indication of where a boy might have gone. The fog was thick that day, unusual even for the hollow. It clung to them like wet wool, reducing visibility to perhaps 15 feet. Men reported becoming disoriented within minutes of entering, losing track of their companions despite being only yards apart. They found nothing. Driscoll filed a missing persons report, though he held little hope of assistance from state authorities. The Depression had stretched resources thin everywhere, and a missing child from a remote hollow in one of Kentucky's poorest counties would merit little attention. He was correct. The state police sent a brief acknowledgment and nothing more. But then, 3 weeks after Thomas disappeared, something else happened. A girl named Margaret Sullivan vanished from her family's farm 6 miles northeast of Drowned Hollow. She was 9 years old, described by her parents as cautious and obedient. She had gone to gather firewood at the edge of their property on a November afternoon. Like Thomas, she simply never returned. Like Thomas, her tracks were found leading toward the ridge system that surrounded Drowned Hollow. Like Thomas, those tracks ended at a precipice overlooking the fog-filled basin. This time, Sheriff Driscoll didn't wait for a search party to form organically. He conscripted 25 men, brought Brutus and 2 other tracking dogs, and descended into the hollow with grim determination. They searched for 3 days. They explored every accessible cave entrance, waded through the Black Creek, climbed the impossible slopes where hemlocks grew like twisted sentinels. They found Margaret Sullivan on the 3rd day, or rather, they found what remained of her. The discovery occurred in one of the larger caves, approximately half a mile into the hollow's eastern ridge. Deputy Vernon Hackett was the first to see it, the beam of his flashlight catching something pale against the dark stone. He called out, his voice tight with an emotion somewhere between horror and relief. Margaret Sullivan's body lay in a shallow depression near the back of the cave. She had been there perhaps 2 weeks, her body preserved by the cave's constant cold. The cause of death was immediately apparent: trauma to the skull, a single devastating blow that had fractured the bone. But what disturbed the men who crowded into that cave, what would haunt their dreams for years afterward, was the positioning. She had been arranged. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Her legs were straight, ankles together. Her eyes had been closed. Stones had been placed in a circle around her body, each one approximately the same size, each one painted with symbols that none of the men recognized. And perhaps most disturbing, she had been dressed in clothing that wasn't hers. A simple white dress, old-fashioned even by 1937 standards, sewn from what appeared to be flour sacks. Sheriff Driscoll stood in that cave for a long time, studying the scene, his mind working through possibilities. This wasn't a simple tragedy. This wasn't an accident or an animal attack. This was murder, ritualized and deliberate. But murder by whom, and for what purpose? Where's the boy? Vernon asked quietly. If whoever did this took the girl, they probably took Thomas too. Driscoll nodded slowly. Get more men. We search every cave in this hollow, every single one. The expanded search took 2 weeks. They mapped 13 major caves and countless smaller fissures in the limestone. They found nothing. No sign of Thomas Elkridge, no indication of anyone living in the hollow, no camps or shelters or supplies. Just stone and darkness and that perpetual fog that seemed to watch them with something approaching malevolence. The investigation stalled. Margaret Sullivan's body was brought up from the hollow and buried in the small cemetery outside Cranshaw Fork. The white dress was kept as evidence, though analysis revealed nothing useful. It was hand-sewn, yes, but the technique was common throughout the region. The stones with their painted symbols were collected, photographed, sent to a professor at the University of Kentucky who specialized in Appalachian folklore. His response came 3 weeks later. The symbols appeared to be a mixture of Cherokee spiritual markings and older, possibly pre-Columbian designs, but their specific meaning was unclear. Thomas Elkridge was never found. Winter arrived, bringing snow that buried the mountains under 3 feet of white silence. The hollow became impassable, its secrets locked under ice and frozen fog. Families kept their children close. The story of what happened in Drowned Hollow spread through the county like contagion, growing with each retelling, accumulating supernatural elements and warnings. And then, in March of 1938, when the snow began to melt and the world showed signs of thawing, another child disappeared. His name was Daniel Pritchard, age 6, taken from his family's property 8 miles south of the hollow. Same pattern, child sent on a simple errand, never returning. Tracks leading toward the ridge system. Tracks ending at a precipice. This time, Sheriff Driscoll didn't search the hollow immediately. Instead, he did something that would prove crucial to solving the case. He studied maps. Harlan County had been surveyed multiple times since its founding. Driscoll obtained every map he could find, spreading them across his office desk, comparing topographical features and property boundaries. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Drowned Hollow sat at the geometric center of a rough circle, approximately 20 miles in diameter. Every property from which a child had vanished fell on or near the circumference of that circle. More than that, when he marked the locations of Thomas Elkridge's and Margaret Sullivan's homes, then added the Pritchard farm, the 3 points formed a perfect triangle with Drowned Hollow at its center. This isn't random, he told Vernon, his finger tracing the lines he'd drawn on the map. Someone is selecting children based on geography, someone who understands the land, who knows these mountains. You think someone's living in the hollow? Vernon asked. I think someone knows those caves better than we do, and I think they've been using them longer than we've been looking. The search for Daniel Pritchard began the following morning. This time, Driscoll brought 40 men, divided them into teams, assigned each team to a specific cave system. He also brought something else. A local man named Silas Crowder, 78 years old, who claimed to have explored Drowned Hollow extensively in his youth. Silas was a bent figure, weathered by time and hardship, but his mind remained sharp. He stood at the rim of the hollow, surveying the fog-filled basin below, and nodded slowly. There's caves within caves in there, he said, his voice like gravel, passages that run for miles underground. When I was a boy, maybe 12, I explored with my brother. We found things. What things? Driscoll asked. Signs of habitation. Old signs from before white folk settled here, and new signs too, or what seemed new at the time, that was 66 years ago. We found bones in one cave, human bones. Arranged in patterns, we found chambers with symbols painted on the walls. My brother wanted to keep exploring, but He paused, his rheumy eyes distant with memory. I felt something down there, something watching. We left and never went back. Can you guide us? Silas studied the sheriff for a long moment. I can try, But Sheriff, you need to understand something. That hollow, it's not right, never has been. Cherokee wouldn't go near it. The first white settlers avoided it. There's a reason it's never been developed, never been farmed or logged or built on. People who spend too much time there start having dreams, dark dreams, dreams of drowning in fog, of being pulled down into earth. Superstition, Driscoll said, though without much confidence. Maybe, Silas replied, or maybe it's something else. Maybe some places are just wrong, Sheriff, wrong in their bones. They descended that afternoon, Silas leading despite his age, moving with surprising confidence through the fog. He led them to a cave entrance on the hollow's western slope, partially hidden by a rockfall that looked natural, but, on closer examination, showed signs of deliberate arrangement. This is one of the main passages, Silas explained. It connects to a whole network underneath the hollow. If someone was hiding down here, this is where they'd be. The cave entrance was narrow, requiring men to move single file. Sheriff Driscoll went first, flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed almost solid. The passage descended steeply, water trickling along one wall, limestone formations catching light and throwing shadows that moved with disturbing independence. They had penetrated perhaps 200 feet when Driscoll heard it, singing, faint, distant, echoing through stone corridors with a quality that made it impossible to determine direction. A child's voice, high and pure, singing a melody he didn't recognize. The words were unclear, swallowed by echoes and distance, but the sound itself was unmistakable. Jesus Christ, Vernon whispered behind him, is that Daniel? Driscoll said, his heart hammering. That's Daniel Pritchard. They moved faster, following the sound, which grew louder as they descended. The passage opened into a larger chamber, ceiling rising perhaps 30 feet overhead, natural columns of limestone creating a forest of stone. And there, in the far corner of this chamber, illuminated by the beam of Driscoll's flashlight, sat a figure. A woman. She was ancient, impossibly old, her skin like leather stretched over bone. She wore clothing that seemed assembled from multiple eras, a pioneer woman's dress beneath a Cherokee ceremonial shawl, her hair white and long and decorated with feathers and bones. She sat beside a small fire that burned without smoke, the flames a peculiar blue-green color that gave off almost no heat. And beside her, sitting perfectly still with eyes that stared at nothing, was Daniel Pritchard. "Don't move," Driscoll commanded, his hand going to his revolver. Behind him, he heard the other men crowding into the chamber, their flashlights creating a constellation of beams in the darkness. The woman looked up at them. Her eyes were filmed with cataracts, nearly white, but somehow Driscoll had the distinct impression that she could see them perfectly. More than see them, that she could look into them, read their secrets, understand their fears in ways that went beyond simple observation. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "This is sacred ground, a thin place, a place of passage. Where's Thomas Elkridge?" Driscoll demanded. "Where's Margaret Sullivan?" The woman smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. A practice Driscoll had read about in books about indigenous tribes, but had never seen in person. "The children are where they need to be. The offering has been made. The balance is maintained. The balance." Vernon moved forward, his own weapon drawn. "You're talking about murder, you crazy." "Not murder," the woman interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Sacrifice. There is a difference, young man. Murder is personal. Sacrifice is necessary. These mountains have demanded their price since time before memory. Someone must pay. Someone must always pay." Driscoll felt his stomach turn. "You've been taking children. For how long?" "I am the keeper," she said simply. "As my mother was before me, and her mother before her. For 9 generations we have maintained the balance, 1 child every 7 years, 7 children total, 7 cycles, to keep the hungry dark satisfied, to keep it from spreading beyond this hollow. You're insane, Vernon said. Am I? The woman's smile widened. Then, why does this hollow exist? Why does the fog gather here and nowhere else? Why do compasses fail, and dogs refuse to enter, and people dream of drowning? There is something beneath this place. Gentlemen, something old and hungry. My family has kept it fed, kept it contained. We take 7 children across 7 cycles, and in return it stays here. It doesn't spread. It doesn't consume the entire county. Sheriff Driscoll moved forward, his mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This was madness, the ravings of a lunatic. Yet he stood in this impossible cave, looking at this impossible woman, beside a child who seemed caught in some kind of trance, and part of him. The part that had fought in French trenches, that had seen men's bodies torn apart by artillery, that had learned to believe in horrors whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. Where are the other children? He asked quietly. The first 6 are returned to the earth. She replied. Their spirits feed the dark. Their bones become part of the hollow. Only the 7th remains, as is tradition. The 7th will guide me to the next cycle, will learn the songs and the rituals. Will take my place when my time ends. Daniel, Driscoll said, looking at the boy. Daniel, can you hear me? The boy didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the middle distance, his breathing shallow but regular. He cannot hear you, the woman said. He is already beginning his transformation. In 7 days he will be mine completely. He will be the 8th keeper, and I will finally rest. Over my dead body, Vernon snarled, moving forward. The woman raised one hand, and the cave suddenly seemed to shudder. The blue-green flames of her fire leaped higher. From somewhere deep below, a sound emerged, a low, grinding rumble like stone moving against stone, or like something massive breathing. You don't understand, the woman said, her voice carrying an urgency that cut through Driscoll's disbelief. If you take the boy, if you break the cycle, the dark will be free. It will spread. It will consume everything within reach. Children will vanish not one at a time, but in dozens. The hollow will grow. The fog will spread. You've seen what happens in thin places where the balance breaks. You've heard the stories. I've heard enough, Driscoll said. He holstered his weapon and moved toward Daniel. Vernon, grab him. Let's get him out of here. The woman stood, surprisingly fast for someone so ancient. You fool, she hissed. You arrogant fool. You think your laws matter here. You think your badges and your guns have any meaning in this place. Vernon reached for Daniel. The moment his hand touched the boy's shoulder, 3 things happened simultaneously. The boy screamed, a sound unlike anything Driscoll had ever heard, equal parts human and something else, something that echoed with the grinding of stone and the rush of underground water. The fire exploded outward, blue, green flames racing across the cave floor in unnatural patterns, creating walls of light that trapped the men against the chamber's perimeter. And from somewhere below, from passages that descended into absolute darkness, came answering screams. Not human, not animal, something older than both. Now you've done it, the woman said, her voice carrying an edge of something that might have been fear or satisfaction or both. Now the dark knows you're here. Now it's hungry, and I can't protect you anymore. What happened in the following moments would be debated, analyzed, and ultimately dismissed as mass hysteria by official reports. The men who were there that day, the 40 who descended into Drowned Hollow, and the 15 who penetrated deep enough to reach the woman's cave, would carry the memory to their graves. Most refused to speak of it. Some left Harlan County entirely, abandoning homes and families to escape the nightmares. Sheriff Coleman Driscoll's official report, filed with the state police on March 19, 1938, contained only the barest facts: suspect apprehended, child recovered, case closed. But his private journal, discovered after his death in 1963, told a different story. In his journal, Driscoll wrote, "We found something in those caves, not just the woman, not just the boy. We found proof that reality is thinner than we believe, that there are places where the rules we take for granted simply don't apply. I saw things move in that darkness, not shadows, things. I heard voices speaking languages that hurt to hear, that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. And I felt hunger, not metaphorical hunger, actual, physical, crushing hunger emanating from the depths below, as though the earth itself was starving." Vernon Hackett's account, given years later to his son and recorded just before his death in 1979, was more specific. "The caves started changing while we were in there. Passages we'd come through weren't in the same places when we tried to leave. The stone walls looked alive, breathing, and there were markings on them, symbols that seemed to write themselves as we watched. The old woman kept saying we'd broken something, that the balance was destroyed, that the dark would take payment one way or another. Daniel was screaming, but it wasn't Daniel's voice. It was older, deeper, like something speaking through him. What is documented, what can be verified through multiple witness statements and physical evidence, is this: the woman was taken into custody. Her name, according to her own statement, was Mary Whitfield. She claimed to be 112 years old. Though this was impossible to verify, no birth records existed for her, no documentation of any kind. She claimed descent from the British surveyor Marcus Whitfield, who had mapped the hollow in 1789, claimed her family had been keeping the balance for 9 generations, claimed she was the 8th keeper, and Daniel Pritchard was meant to be the 9th. Daniel Pritchard was recovered. He was alive, physically unharmed except for malnutrition and dehydration, but he was changed. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to his name. For 3 weeks after his rescue, he would only stare at walls and occasionally hum that same melody Sheriff Driscoll had heard echoing through the caves. Thomas Elkridge's remains were found 2 days later, in a different cave, arranged in the same ritual manner as Margaret Sullivan. The white dress, the circle of painted stones, the careful positioning of the body. Mary Whitfield was charged with 3 counts of murder. Thomas Elkridge, Margaret Sullivan, and despite the lack of a body, Daniel Pritchard's presumed intended death. The trial began in May of 1938 and lasted 3 days. The courtroom in Harlan was packed, people traveling from across the county to witness what many were calling the trial of the century. Mary Whitfield, shackled but unbowed, offered no defense. She simply repeated her story. She was the keeper, the guardian, the one who maintained the balance between the world of light and the world of darkness. She had taken 7 children across 7 7-year cycles. She had done what was necessary to protect the county from something far worse than her actions. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. The judge, a 60-year-old man named Harrison Caldwell, who had presided over the Harlan County Circuit Court for 23 years, sentenced Mary Whitfield to death by hanging. The execution was scheduled for June 17, 1938. She showed no emotion at the sentencing. She only looked at Sheriff Driscoll, who sat in the courtroom gallery, and spoke words that he would remember until his dying day. "You've broken the cycle. 7 children in 7 cycles was the price to keep it contained. Now the debt is unpaid. The dark will find another way. It always does. And when it comes for its payment, Sheriff, remember that I offered you a choice. Remember that I Tried to save you. The hanging took place as scheduled. Mary Whitfield walked to the gallows without assistance, her head high. She refused a blindfold. Her last words, spoken clearly enough that the 20 witnesses present could hear, were, "The balance must be maintained. Someone will pay. Someone always pays." She dropped at 8:03 in the morning. The doctor confirmed death at 8:07. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave outside the county line, as per her request. 3 days later, on June 20th, 1938, Daniel Pritchard died. The official cause was listed as natural causes, a heart condition that had gone undiagnosed. His parents, devastated by months of watching their son exist in a waking coma, accepted this explanation. But the doctor who examined the body, a man named Elijah Reeves, noted something unusual in his private records. Daniel's heart showed no signs of disease. It had simply stopped, as though something had reached inside the boy's chest and turned off a switch. Sheriff Driscoll stood at Daniel's grave and wondered if Mary Whitfield had been right, wondered if breaking the cycle had consequences, wondered if the 7 children she'd taken were a price that kept something worse at bay. But the deaths stopped. The disappearances ended. Drowned Hollow remained empty, avoided, wrapped in its perpetual fog, but no longer claiming victims. For exactly 7 years, in 1945, as World War II drew to its bloody conclusion, a girl named Patricia Kensington vanished from her family's farm. She was 8 years old. Her tracks led to the rim of Drowned Hollow and stopped. Despite extensive searches, her body was never found. In 1952, a boy named William Cross disappeared under identical circumstances. Age 9. Tracks leading to the hollow, no body recovered. In 1959, another child. In 1966, another. In 1973, in 1980, in 1987, 7 children across 7 7-year cycles, all taken from properties that formed a geometric pattern around Drowned Hollow, all vanishing without explanation, all entering the statistical records as missing persons, unsolved cases, tragedies that faded from public memory even as they haunted private nightmares. Sheriff Coleman Driscoll retired in 1955, his health broken, his faith in rational explanation shattered. He moved to Louisville, as far from Harlan County as he could manage while remaining in Kentucky. But he kept files. He tracked the disappearances. He noted the pattern. His final journal entry, dated September 3, 1963, 2 weeks before his death from a massive stroke, reads simply, "She was right. The balance demands payment. The question isn't whether children will be taken. The question is whether they're taken in ones across decades, or in hundreds all at once. I pray I never learn the answer." The story of Mary Whitfield and Drowned Hollow remains one of the most disturbing chapters in Appalachian history, a case that sits uncomfortably between documented fact and something darker, something that resists rational explanation. Official records confirm the deaths of Thomas Elkridge and Margaret Sullivan. They confirm the arrest, trial, and execution of Mary Whitfield. They confirm the subsequent death of Daniel Pritchard. But they become vague, almost deliberately imprecise, when addressing the larger pattern. The 7 subsequent disappearances are documented separately, each treated as an isolated incident, never connected officially despite sharing nearly identical circumstances. In 1994, the last documented disappearance occurred. A boy named Michael Harrison, age 7, vanished while playing near his family's property. His tracks, clear in the mud of an autumn rain, led directly to the rim of Drowned Hollow, and stopped. His body was never found. The case remains open but inactive, one more unsolved mystery in a county that has known too many. But here's what makes the story of Drowned Hollow truly disturbing, what elevates it beyond simple tragedy or even serial murder: the geological studies. In 2003, a team from the University of Kentucky conducted an extensive survey of Drowned Hollow as part of a larger study of karst formations in eastern Kentucky. They mapped the cave systems, analyzed the limestone composition, studied the hydrology. Their report, buried in academic archives and largely ignored by mainstream science, contained several anomalies they couldn't explain. The caves were significantly older than surrounding formations, suggesting they predated the current mountain structure by millions of years. The fog that gathered in the hollow had an unusually high concentration of certain trace gases that the researchers couldn't identify. And most disturbing, several of the deeper passages contained what appeared to be artificial modifications: tool marks in stone, deliberate shaping of natural chambers, symbols carved or painted on. Rock faces that carbon dating suggested were at least 3,000 years old. Someone had been using those caves long before European contact, long before Cherokee habitation. Someone or something had recognized the hollow as significant and had marked it accordingly. The university team's recommendation that Drowned Hollow be designated as a protected site and permanently closed to public access. To this day, that recommendation stands. The hollow is fenced, posted with no trespassing signs, officially designated as unstable and dangerous. Maps of Harlan County show it as a blank space, a depression in the landscape with no details provided. Satellite imagery shows only fog and trees, the actual topography obscured by perpetual weather patterns that meteorologists describe as unusual but not unprecedented. Local people still avoid it. Stories persist of hikers who ignored the warnings and entered anyway, reporting disorientation, nightmares, a feeling of being watched by something vast and patient. Some report hearing children singing in the caves. Some report seeing lights moving in the darkness, blue-green flames that flicker and dance with no apparent source. And every 7 years, parents in Harlan County and the surrounding areas hold their children a little closer. Watch them a little more carefully. Remember the stories their own parents told them about the price that must be paid, about the balance that must be maintained, about the dark that hungers and waits and occasionally takes what it needs. Questions remain, disturbing questions that resist easy answers. Was Mary Whitfield a serial killer who constructed an elaborate delusion to justify her actions? Or was she, as she claimed, a guardian maintaining an ancient compact? Why did the disappearances follow such a precise pattern? 7 children, 7 7-year cycles. What lies in the deepest passages of those caves that made experienced explorers refuse to return? What causes the anomalies in compass readings, the unusual fog patterns, the persistent sense of wrongness that permeates the hollow? Perhaps most troubling, if Mary Whitfield was simply a murderer, why did the pattern continue after her death? 7 more children across 7 more cycles, vanishing under identical circumstances, their disappearances forming the same geometric pattern around the hollow that the original victims established. Coincidence, mass hysteria, a copycat killer who somehow managed to operate undetected for decades. Or something else, something older and darker and far more terrifying than a single disturbed woman performing ritual murders. The story of Drowned Hollow forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities about the nature of reality, about places where the world we understand might be thinner than we believe, where ancient hungers might persist, where prices might need to be paid in blood and innocence to keep something worse contained. It asks us to consider, what if there are bargains older than civilization? What if there are places where those bargains must be honored, where breaking them unleashes consequences we cannot comprehend? Sheriff Driscoll believed he was serving justice by arresting Mary Whitfield. He believed he was saving a child by rescuing Daniel Pritchard. But in the years that followed, as more children vanished, as the pattern reasserted itself with mechanical precision, he came to question whether justice was the right response to a situation that transcended human concepts of right and wrong. In his final journal entry, written just weeks before his death, he posed a question that has no comfortable answer. If you could save one life now by sacrificing 7 lives across 7 decades, would you? If you could prevent hundreds of deaths by allowing a handful spread across generations, where does morality stand? Where does justice end and necessary evil begin? These are questions without answers, questions that keep us awake in the dark, listening to sounds we can't quite identify, wondering about the price of our safety and who might be paying it. To this day, if you drive through Harlan County, if you ask locals about Drowned Hollow, you'll receive brief responses and quick subject changes. People there don't like to discuss it, don't like to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it means accepting that their world contains shadows deeper than daylight can penetrate, that their mountains hide secrets that predate understanding. And on certain nights, when the fog gathers thick and the wind moves through the hemlocks with a sound like whispered warnings, people still report hearing children singing in the hollow. High, pure voices echoing through stone corridors, singing melodies that no one taught them, songs that seem to come from somewhere older than memory. The cycle should have completed in 1990, for with Michael Harrison's disappearance, the 7th child of the 7th cycle since Mary Whitfield's execution. If the pattern holds, if the balance she spoke of is real, the next disappearance should occur in 2001. It didn't. The 2001 date passed without incident. No child vanished. No tracks led to the hollow's rim. The cycle, it seemed, had finally broken. Some interpret this as proof that Mary Whitfield was simply a killer, that her death ended the threat, that subsequent disappearances were either coincidence or copycat crimes that eventually stopped. That interpretation offers comfort. It allows us to file this story away as a tragic chapter of history, horrifying but concluded. But others, those who know the mountains, those who understand that some stories don't have clean endings, wonder if the silence is something else. Wonder if the hunger that supposedly dwelt in Drowned Hollow has finally been satisfied, or if it's simply sleeping, waiting, building its appetite for a feast rather than the slow succession of single victims. They wonder if breaking the cycle completely, if allowing even one 7-year period to pass without payment, might mean that when the dark comes again, it will come not for 7 children across 7 decades, but for 700 all at once. The hollow remains. The fog still gathers. The caves still descend into darkness that no flashlight fully penetrates. And in the deepest passages, in chambers that the university survey team refused to explore, in places where the stone walls bear symbols from civilizations lost to time, something might still wait. The story of Mary Whitfield and the 7 children who vanished in Drowned Hollow stands as a disturbing reminder that there are places in this world where our certainties fail, where the comfortable explanations we construct to protect ourselves from the dark prove inadequate. It reminds us that the mountains of Appalachia have been home to human beings for thousands of years, and those thousands of years have accumulated stories, beliefs, and possibly truths that don't fit neatly into our modern understanding of how the world works. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, whether you think Mary Whitfield was a guardian or a monster, whether you accept the possibility that some places require blood sacrifice to maintain cosmic balance or reject such notions as primitive superstition, the facts remain. 7 children died. 7 more vanished afterward. The pattern was precise, geometric, ritualized, and no one has ever provided a completely satisfactory explanation that accounts for all the elements of this case. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some stories are meant to end with questions rather than answers. And some places, like Drowned Hollow, are meant to be avoided, respected, left to their fog and their darkness and their secrets. If this journey through one of Appalachia's darkest mysteries has resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering questions about the nature of reality and the price of survival, then consider subscribing to this channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time that deserve to be examined with the same careful attention we've given to this account. Leave a like if this story has provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your thoughts on whether Mary Whitfield was a killer or a keeper, whether sacrifice can ever be justified, whether there are bargains older than we know that still bind us. Until next time, remember that the world is stranger than we believe, darker than we admit, and filled with places where the light of reason fails to penetrate. Some hollows are best left unexplored, some cycles are best left unbroken, and some darkness is best left fed.